Есть оружие, да знают об этом. Сейчас только я сказал. Тоже есть оружие, которое может поражать цели на их территории.
We're going to destroy this country. We're going to end up in a world war. We'll end up in World War III. They'll destroy our country.
World War III. Those three words send a chill down your spine, don't they? I mean, this obviously must not be our reality at this time, but what if I told you the unthinkable has started? We've reached a point where the prospect of another global conflict isn't just a vague future worry, but an alarming possibility taking shape as we speak. Look at what's happening globally. It feels like the terrifying plot of a dystopian movie coming to life. And I don't think I'm being overdramatic here. The threat of a new world war feels all too real. Over 75 years ago, the world was engulfed in the flames of World War II. It was a conflict of unprecedented scale and savagery that left millions dead and entire cities in ruin. In its aftermath, the world reunited with a vow: never again. But lately, it feels like we're watching history repeat itself in terrifying ways. Just look at what's happening in Ukraine. A brutal war rages on, displacing millions and threatening to spill over into neighboring countries. Or check the ongoing violence in Gaza, where civilian casualties continue to mount. The similarities to the lead up to World War II are chilling. Nationalism and populism are on the rise. Trade wars and closed borders are stoking economic turmoil. And world powers increasingly turn inward, rejecting the principles of global cooperation that helped keep the peace for decades. Now, I know what you're thinking, but aren't we living in the longest period of peace in human history? And you'd be right, sort of. Whilst worldwide conflict may be down overall, the statistics paint a darker picture. According to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, we're facing the highest number of violent conflicts since 1945. In his words, the world is experiencing the highest number of violent conflicts since 1945 as World War II drew to a close. And if those facts don't shake you, listen to this. Over 2 billion people, a quarter of humanity, live in areas plagued by violence and insecurity. Another startling fact? The same UN Secretary General stated that peace, the UN's core mission, is now under grave threat. And this is because 6 out of 7 people in almost every country feel fundamentally insecure about their safety. In a recent survey, most Britons believe another world war is likely soon. And this grim statement isn't just isolated to the UK. Ask almost anywhere in the world and people will tell you the unthinkable prospect of a global conflict feels much more thinkable these days. The hostilities and hatred that fueled World War II are resurfacing with terrifying speed. Geopolitical tensions escalate by the day. So I have to ask, more than 75 years after World War II ended, are we on the verge of another world war? And if so, should we be afraid? You see, when you start looking at the particulars of what's happening across the globe right now, you can't help but to notice some eerily familiar patterns emerging. Patterns that are directly reminiscent of the years leading up to World War II. Think about it. In the 1930s, the Nazi Party's popularity in Germany surged from just 2.6% of the vote in 1928 to a staggering 43.9% by 1933 when Hitler took over power. Today, across Europe and other parts of the world, we're seeing a very similar rise of far-right, nationalist, and populist movements. In France, the National Rally Party led by Marine Le Pen captured over 41% of the votes in the 2022 presidential election. In the Netherlands, the Anti-Immigrant Party for Freedom won almost 11% in 2021. Authoritarian populist leaders have also taken charge in places like Hungary and Turkey. It's the same brand of us versus them xenophobic rhetoric and ultra-nationalist movement that helped propel the Nazis to power and authority back then. History may not be repeating itself, but it's definitely rhyming in some disturbing ways. Then there are the escalating trade wars and economic conflicts between today's major world powers like the US and China. Tensions like these over economic domination played a major role in stoking the fires of World War II in the first place. To put this into perspective, during their recent trade war, the US imposed tariffs on over $350 billion worth of Chinese imports, about 18% of all goods coming from China. Beijing retaliated with its own tariffs on $100 billion of American products. Between them, there have been massive cumulative tariffs from 2018 to 2020, with the tariff rate swinging from 5% to 25%. These sorts of tit-for-tat economic attacks are straight out of the pre-World War II playbook. Back then, the protectionist policies and retaliatory tariffs created a hugely destabilizing global trade war in the 1930s that helped push the world into armed conflict. But it's not just the economic side. We're also witnessing extremely concerning issues around international institutions, treaties, and cooperative alliances that were put in place after World War II, specifically to prevent another global war from happening again. Take the United Nations, for example, an organization founded in 1945 with a primary mission of maintaining world peace and security. Yet, in recent years, we've seen several of its most powerful members essentially abandoning or undermining it. The US withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council in 2018 and UNESCO in 2017, accusing them of anti-Israel bias. The previous administration even initiated the process of fully withdrawing from the World Health Organization in 2020 before reversing course.
On Tuesday, Trump notified the UN that the US would be withdrawing from the organization, which he is accused of being under China's control when the outbreak of coronavirus emerged in Wuhan.
And it's not just the UN. Core alliances like NATO are being questioned and destabilized. Cooperative free trade agreements are being torn up and economic blocs are fracturing. This echoes what happened in the lead up to World War II, when a lack of internal cooperation, failed diplomacy, and the collapse of groups like the League of Nations cleared the path for conflict. Of course, perhaps the most glaring parallel to draw between then and now is the number of active territorial disputes, regional flashpoints, and simmering geopolitical conflicts with the potential to erupt into something far, far worse. In the 1930s, you had unresolved territorial claims like Germany's desire to reclaim land lost after World War I, Imperial Japan's invasion of Manchuria and other parts of China, and Italy's conquest of Abyssinia, which was largely unpunished by the League of Nations. Today, the stakes are equally high with plenty of present-day parallels. There's still ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine over Ukrainian territory that first erupted in 2014, and effectively kicked off a new Cold War with the West. You've got the increasingly concerning territorial disputes over the South China Sea, especially between China and Taiwan. While the democratically elected Taiwanese government and a large majority of its population support the independence from the mainland China, China has a strong interest to unify the island with the mainland. Some analysts fear that China attacking Taiwan could potentially drag the United States into a war with China. Then, of course, there's the decades-long powder keg situation in Kashmir between nuclear-armed India and Pakistan. And let's not forget the ongoing Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories in the West Bank and Gaza, a brutal cycle of violence with no end in sight. Any one of these regional flashpoints holds the potential to rapidly escalate and draw in larger global powers, much like how the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand ultimately plunged all of Europe into war back in 1914.
You're now seeing he was in a bakery just for a sandwich, because he didn't think they were going to go down this road. He looks out the window, he looks out the door of the bakery, and he sees that they're there, they actually are there, and he assassinates the both of them, the Archduke and his wife.
Looking more broadly, the overarching rivalries and tensions between today's great powers, the US, Russia, and China, are just as perilous as anything we've seen. There's the deepening US-China rivalry over economic and technological dominance, Beijing's aggressive military buildup and actions in the South China Sea and towards Taiwan, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and renewed hostilities with NATO, North Korea's ongoing development of nuclear weapons and missile programs in defiance of the international community. The Middle East remains a perpetual war victim with conflicts in Syria and Yemen, rising tensions between Iran and US allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia. The list is practically endless. So when you stack it all up, the rising tides of nationalism and authoritarianism, the fracturing of global cooperation, the unsettled geopolitical tensions and disputes simmering worldwide, it's hard to look at the bigger picture and not be reminded of that uneasy period between the two world wars. Or maybe World War III won't be another bloody conflict with guns, tanks, and bombs. The next global catastrophe may be entirely different, waged not with conventional weapons, but through code, viruses, and rising temperatures. Cyber warfare is already an alarming reality. The Stuxnet worm disabled a fifth of Iran's nuclear centrifuges. Russian hackers have attacked Ukraine's power grid, causing widespread blackouts. And who could forget that global ransomware attacks like WannaCry that crippled computers across the world?
A crippling cyber attack has businesses around the world on high alert. The ransomware, known as WannaCry.
I want to move on to the other developing story this morning, the global cyber attack.
The National Security Agency developed this software, and it's now being used by criminals around the world to demand ransom.
Security experts say this is one of the worst and most widespread pieces of malware they've ever seen.
But cyber attacks are just the beginning. In our interconnected world, malicious hackers could potentially disrupt everything from financial systems to nuclear power plants with the click of a button. It's the 21st century warfare with apocalyptic implications. Then there are pandemics, another major threat that knows no borders. We've seen flashes of their destructive potential with diseases like HIV, AIDS, and the influenza strains that killed millions. But many experts warn we are ripe for an outbreak on a civilization-ending scale. And there is climate change stoking land and power conflicts. So, in many ways, the dangers facing humanity today are less conventional but no less existential than those of the past. Now, don't get me wrong, the traditional risks haven't gone away either. Territorial disputes, great power rivalries, and rogue nuclear states still hold the potential for catastrophic armed conflict. But in our modern age, World War may come cloaked in a very different disguise. And one of the most terrifying of all the disguises is a world war with nukes. The threat is as real as it's ever been when it comes to nuclear weapons. Take Russia, for instance. The Kremlin has made thinly veiled threats about potential nuclear escalation. Its parliament even revoked its nuclear test ban treaty, leaving the door open to resume explosive testing for the first time since the Cold War.
Должен всемерно укреплять вооруженные силы, обеспечивать их постоянное техническое переоснащение и модернизацию.
And they're not alone. The United States itself is spending billions to modernize its nuclear forces and infrastructure. Even China appears to be prepping for possible nuclear tests based on satellite images of its facilities. Now, we may be forced to ask, why these renewed nuclear talks? To be honest, the motivations vary, from wanting better computer modeling data to developing new, low-yield tactical nukes. But the underlying message is clear. These powers want credible nuclear deterrents ready to go if need be. Let's not forget, we are already living in an era with nearly 13,000 nuclear warheads worldwide, over 90% controlled by Russia and the US alone. The global arms race never really ended, it just kept chugging along in the background all this time. It's bone-chilling when you consider the destructive power of these weapons. We're talking about city-leveling bombs that made Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like firecrackers. The largest test ever, the Soviet Union Tsar bomber, had a staggering 50 megaton yield.
Приближается к точке взрыва. Высота 4000 метров. Осталось 3 секунды. 2, 1, 0. Взрыв сопровождался световой вспышкой необычной силы. В этот момент самолет-носитель находился в 40 и последующее свечение, несмотря на сплошную облачность.
Now, I'm not trying to be alarmist here. I'm simply laying out the stark numbers and facts about the genuine nuclear threat we still face every day. Intellectually, we all know these weapons exist, but I think on a deeper level, it's easy to tune them out as distant relics of a bygone era. Except, they're not relics at all. They're risk factors woven into the fabric of our modern world, growing more potent and concerning with each passing decade of geopolitical tensions and mistrust. So if miscalculation, aggression, or sheer madness causes one nuclear spark, whether by intent, error, or cyber attack, we could all be plunged into a cataclysmic fire that consumes us all. It only takes one to light the match that burns the world. On the one hand, the factors that could potentially lead to World War III are concerning. The rise of nationalism, eroding global institutions, and escalating regional conflicts are all perilous parallels to the years preceding past world wars. And of course, the lingering existential threat posed by nuclear weapons can never be ignored. However, I don't think fatalism and doomsaying are warranted or productive. For all the negative trend lines, there are also powerful countervailing forces for peace and stability. Global economic interdependence acts as a deterrent against major power conflicts that could disrupt the world order. The hard-won lessons from the 20th century's calamities still resonate for many, and modern technologies offer new frontiers for human progress that transcend old cycles of violence. Ultimately, whether we avoid a third world war comes down to the choices we're going to make going forward. If we reject the demons of our worst historical impulses, including, but not limited to, tribalism, ideological extremism, the path of mutually assured destruction, then I firmly believe that we can navigate the choppy geopolitical waters ahead of us. So there you have it for today, guys. Don't hesitate to leave your thoughts via the comments section, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and ring the notification bell so you'll be among the first to know when we publish next. Goodbye for now.